Hello Primary 4 students, to our final lesson on the concept of speed. We will continue sharing all information we learned throughout the concept about energy, motion, and speed. Can you remember what we learned about speed in our previous lessons? أول حاجة اتعلمناها we talked about speed and we said that speed is a measurement of how fast something is moving, and we learned how to measure the speed of objects. How to measure the speed, measuring speed. واتفقنا to measure the speed of the object we should know the distance that it's traveled over time. عشان نقدر نعمل حسابات السبيد لازم ابقى عارف distance والtime. This is through dividing the distance it traveled by the time it takes to travel there. We use the meter per second or kilometer per second as measuring units. اتعلمنا 2 units. Meter per second or kilometer per hour. امتى بستخدم اليونت بتاعت المتر per second؟ لما تكون الديستانس صغيرة، والكيلومتر per hour لما تكون الديستانس كبيرة. تالت حاجة اتعلمناها speed of objects varies depending on the force acting upon them and their kinetic energy that they have to move. So, another info we learned that speed varies. Speed of objects varies. Speed of objects varies. سرعة الحاجات اللي حوالينا بتختلف. بعد كده we said when we talked about speed of objects varies, we got an example like changing the car speed. Like a moving car on the road, when the pushing force affecting it increase, the kinetic energy transfer to the car will increase. فركزنا هنا ان انا عشان اغير سرعتي هحتاج ان انا اغير ال pushing force. واحنا already اتكلمنا عن ال pushing force وقلنا انها سبب بداية الحركة. This means the speed of the car will also increase if we increase the pushing force and the speed. This is what happens when we press the gas pedal. كل ما هندوس دواسة البنزين العربية هتبتدي تمشي أسرع. يبقى إزاي أنا بدي pushing force للكار through the gas pedal. طيب. The opposite will happen when the pushing force affect the objects decrease. Like if we press the car brakes لو دوسنا الفرامل. The kinetic energy will decrease due to the friction between the tires and the road. As the result, the speed of the car will decrease also. يبقى لو أنا عايزة أبطئ العربية I will press the brakes. وطبيعي لو أنا دوست البريكس الكايناتيك energy هتقل فالسبيد كمان هتقل. We learned all about this in the previous lessons. Today's lesson will focus on thinking and analyzing a very interesting topic, just like mechanical engineers. Do you know what mechanical engineers exactly do in the science of cars? This is what we will explore in activity 13, analyze like a scientist. Activity number 13, analyze like a scientist, is a STEM in action activity. STEM in action always help us apply what we learn in our daily life situations. في STEM in action دايما بنربط اللي احنا درسناه بحياتنا. This time we will apply what we learned about speed, motion and energy by exploring solar powered cars. Do you know what is the solar energy? What is the solar energy that can be used to power cars? And most importantly, how these cars are designed and built. Here comes the mission of mechanical engineers. They help design cars and think of energy used to power cars. الميكانيكال engineers بيصنعوا العربيات وكمان بيفكروا ايه الطاقة اللي هتشغل العربية دي. They also think of creative ways to save as much energy as possible, making sure we always have enough energy to power our cars, and at the same time ensure that energy is clean and not harmful at the same time. يعني هم هيعملوا لنا عربيات ويوفروا لنا الطاقة اللي تشغلها، وكمان هيتأكدوا إن الطاقة دي تبقى موجودة دايماً، وكمان ما تأثرش على البيئة. Now you may wonder if there is harmful and harmless energy, and whether the car powered by solar energy are harmful or not. Will solar energy make a car move faster? طب what are the pros and cons of using it? Let's read the text in page 209 about solar-powered cars that will help us to answer these questions. While reading, you should identify the pros and cons, مميزات وعيوب, of using such cars and record them on page 210. You will find T-shaped table, so you should list the advantages, the pros, in the left side and the disadvantages, the cons, in the right side. While reading also, think about whether you would like to become a mechanical engineer one day. Let's start reading. I'm sure you recorded many points. First, let me ask you, what is solar energy? Solar energy is the type of energy that comes from the moon. The moon? Of course not. It comes from the sun through the solar cells on the top of the car. الخلايا الشمسية هي اللي بتاخد طاقة الشمس, solar energy. This energy is used in the cars to move, like the cars that use gasoline or other cars running on electricity by charging their battery. Each type of energy has its pros and cons. Let me know what you recorded in the T chart. Through reading, I learned some pros of the solar vehicles. Let me write them on the board. Let me prepare the table like the one that you have in your book. Now we are preparing T table. Here you have the pros, and here you have the cons. Pros بمعنى advantages and cons بمعنى disadvantages, مميزات وعيوب. أول ميزة عندي قريناها في التكست, they don't need gasoline. So the first pro, don't need gasoline. Of course, this one is a pro, because when the exhaust resulting from burning the gasoline increase, the air is polluted, whereas the solar vehicles do not produce exhaust. لما بيحصل حرق للجازولين جوه الانجن بيطلع دخان. الاكزوست ده كان بيسبب air pollution زي ما اتكلمنا في theme 1. So they won't cause air pollution. Another pros is that they do not use battery. So ايه هنا الميزة؟ They do not use battery. This means they do not need to be charged like electric vehicles. So they do not need to be charged. Okay? Wait. Do they never stop for gas or for charge? هما ما بيتحط لهمش gas ولا بيحصل لهم charging زي electric cars. What about their speed? Are they fast or slow? This question takes us to the most important cons of the solar-powered vehicles. Their speed is slower than the conventional vehicles. So, one of the cons من العيوب بتاعتها إن هم slower than the other vehicles. So, the first cons is that they are slow. تمام؟ يبقى هم أحسن من الكونفنشنال فيكلز العادية عشان هم مش بيحتاجوا جازولين، وأحسن من الإلكتريك كارز لأن هم مش بيحتاجوا يتشحنوا. لكن هم عندهم عيب which is that they are slower. Do you know why? Remember the relation between energy and speed. Because the amount of energy that we can capture from the sun is not as great as the amount of energy that we can get from the gasoline or electric battery. And we learned that less energy moving objects have, their power or their speed will be less. So, the low speed of solar vehicles is the problem that the entrepreneurs and mechanical engineers try to solve. If you want to be a mechanical engineer, you should find a way or an idea to solve this problem. Like one of the engineers' ideas, which is to reduce the weight of the solar vehicles so they would be light and move faster. مشكلة السولار فيكلز إن هم أبطأ، فلازم نلاقي لها حل. الميكانيكال انجينيرز ورواد الأعمال فكروا في حلول، زي مثلا إن هم يخلوا العربية وزنها أخف فتقدر تمشي أسرع. Their ideas reminded me of the cheetah because it has light weight, so it's faster. When we discussed the entrepreneurship, we learned that entrepreneurs start thinking about innovative and simple solutions for the problems facing their community. That's because they correctly identify their goals and set clear plans. رواد الأعمال دايما بيفكروا في مشاكل ويفكروا لها في حلول عشان يقدروا يساعدوا المجتمع. You too can search like mechanical engineers for different solutions to the problems or innovative, simple ideas depending on what you learned about speed. And you may get into groups and share the solutions with the name of your group on مدرستنا Facebook page. Let's move to page 211 and look at the solar vehicle closely. What is your impression on how it looks? Its external shape is very different from conventional vehicles. شكلها من بره مختلف خالص. Do you know what other differences might be there? Let's read the text on the same page entitled Solar Vehicles to identify the most important difference between these vehicles and the conventional ones. This time, we will know what we should do in the rest of the activity from the text. So let's read. So, what is the most important difference between solar and conventional vehicles? Excellent. Speed. Speed calculation. It's easy to calculate the speed of conventional cars, but it's not easy to calculate the speed of solar vehicles. Do you know why? Because there is no speedometer in the solar vehicle. السولار vehicle العربيات اللي بتمشي بالطاقة الشمسية ما عندهاش عداد سرعة. Unlike the conventional cars. This reduces the weight of solar vehicles very much, but make it difficult to measure their speed. لما شلنا عداد السرعة العربية وزنها خف فقدرت تمشي أسرع، بس في نفس الوقت بقى عندي مشكلة تانية إن أنا مش قادر أحسب السرعة. How can we calculate their speed then? This is our activity. You will help mechanical engineers and design a way to calculate speed of solar vehicles. I'll give you some time to think and record your answers in the spaces provided in page 211. Think of all the ways and do not forget our last trials to measure the speed of objects, like the first hands-on investigation, measuring speed, when we measured the distance of various balls traveled, and we used measuring tape and meter stick. What did you need to identify to help you measure the speed of the solar vehicle? Yes, that's right, distance and time. If we know the distance the vehicle travels and how long it takes to travel that distance, we can easily calculate the speed. طبيعي ان انا لو عرفت المسافة اللي العربية تمشيها واخدت وقت قد ايه هقدر احسب السرعة بسهولة جدا. To calculate the speed, my students firstly chose to have the solar vehicle travel a specific known distance to, and they said they would mark the start and the end with 2 marks, so the car will travel from the first mark to the second one. What is the next step? We will track the time. Our colleague said they would use a stopwatch to measure the time the vehicle takes to travel from the first mark to the second. Now, our colleagues know the distance and time. هم عملوا 2 marks فعارفين ال distance وكمان حسبوا الوقت. What's next? That's right. They divide the distance by time to calculate the speed. This is what we learned in the concept speed. After all the activities we performed and the information we learned, we reached the last activity of the concept. Activity number 14, evaluate like a scientist. Let's go and prepare for it. Activity number 14, evaluate like a scientist, is entitled Review Speed. As always, it helps us review the key ideas we learned, this time about speed. And I need you to summarize all you learned about the relation between energy, motion, and speed in page 212. If you have any questions, you may add them at the end of your summary to share them with your colleagues and teacher. And we may also find answers to these questions by the end of our concept and unit project. Of course, each one of us will write their summary in their own style, but I expect that there are main points you will mention in the summaries. Can you tell me like what? أكيد في points معينة كلنا هنبقى مشتركين فيها. The conclusion we reached in the first hands-on investigation measuring speed, which is to measure the speed of a moving object, we should measure the distance it travels and the time it takes to travel there, then divide them. So speed will be described by a unit of distance over a unit of time. يعني عشان نحسب السبيد هنحتاج نجيب الديستنس والتايم وبعدين نعمل لهم divide واليونت بتاعتي هتبقى برضو اليونت of distance over the unit of time. We also learned that to compare the speed of different objects and determine which one is faster, we will measure the distance both objects travel in a given period of time. The object that travels the greater distance in the same amount of time is moving at a greater speed. يعني لو احنا عاملين سباق وهنمشي وقت معين، اللي هيقدر يعمل مسافة أكبر يمشي مسافة أكبر هو كده الأسرع. We can also know which one is faster by knowing which one moves a given distance in a smaller amount of time. In addition to change in speed of object which is affected by force. The more force applied to an object, the faster it goes. For example, when a person pushes a large box, the box will gain kinetic energy and begin to move. But if 4 people push it, there will be greater pushing force. So the kinetic energy of the box will increase. So its speed also will increase. لو أنا هزق البوكس لوحدي فالبوشنج فورس بتاعتي هتتحول لكايناتيك انرجي تحرك البوكس. لكن لو 4 هيزقوا البوكس هيبقى فيه pushing force أكبر بكتير. So the kinetic energy of the box will be larger and its speed will be more. These are some of the key ideas we studied. Now, I'll let you record your summary. Do not forget to record any questions you have. After my students recorded their summaries, we started discussing the questions they came up with, all about speed. An important question we discussed is, how can the moving car's speed affect severity of a collision if the car crashes into something? يا ترى ازاي سرعة العربية هتأثر على قوة التصادم, severity of collision? Please think of this question and then return to discuss it. Our knowledge about speed will help us as we answer it. Many reasons can affect the severity of a car crash, and the most important one of them is the speed. Let me show you this. If we had 2 cars that would move in opposite direction and are about to crash into one another. If they were moving slowly, would they crash into each other in the same way they would if they were moving fast? Of course not. What is the difference? Let me show you this. If I have the two cars وهما ماشيين بسرعة بسيطة، تعالوا نشوف الكراشنج اللي هيحصل. صوته حتى كان بسيط قوي، ممكن تبقوا ما سمعتوهوش. طب لو هما ماشيين بسرعة كبيرة، ايه اللي هيحصل؟ حسيتوا بالفرق؟ This is the difference in speed. The first factor عندي هو السبيد. The other factor is the kinetic energy and pushing force of the cars. They are also different. From what we learned, we can predict that the cars which move faster have high kinetic energy. So when the two cars crash into each other, very big pushing force will be applied in opposite directions. So the collision will be very strong and great losses would happen. But if the cars move at slower speed, their kinetic energy will be low. So when they crash into each other, smaller pushing forces will be applied in opposite directions. So the collision will not be that strong and less losses would happen. This question reminds me of the unit project, which is about the science of car crashes, where we are required to design a tool that maintains the safety of passengers during a collision. لو انتوا فاكرين اليونت بروجكت كان بيتكلم عن طريقة لحماية الباسنجرز اللي بيركبوا العربية في خلال التصادم. Think about how can we use energy, motion and speed to improve the safety features of passengers' vehicles. I want you to discuss this question with one of your colleagues or family member. We are at the end of our lesson and the end of concept 3, speed. In today's lesson, we explored solar vehicles and determined their pros and cons, the advantages with disadvantages بتاعتهم. وما تنسوش ان احنا كتبناهم في table. We also thought of designing a way to calculate their speed and there is no speedometer عشان اتفقنا ان هم حبوا يخففوا وزنهم فما حطوش عداد للسرعة. And we wrote a summary of all the key ideas we learned in this concept. Our next concept is entitled Energy and Collisions. Will help us answer our questions. It's about the energy of objects included in a collision. And we will explore a very important concept, mass. Your mission till we meet in the next concept is to search more about the meaning of the word mass. Mass يعني كتلة. عايزاكم تدوروا على معناها وتشوفوا تأثيرها ايه على الموشن والكوليجن. Thanks primary 4 students and see you in our next concept.